Morning, everyone. We'll just give it a minute or two just for the rest of the folks to join. It's great to see you guys here today. Let's give it a minute and we'll get cracking. Just a few more people coming through the door. Won't be a moment. Cool. Right. Let's get the show on the road. So good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining today's webinar, which we've titled Addressing Data in the Risk of AI. Fantastic to have such a broad audience in attendance. Got some good numbers on the board for today. So really looking forward to the conversation. My name's Richard Croker. I'm delighted to be hosting this session today with Dave Matthews, a Senior Solutions Engineer at Concentric AI. As we go through the webinar today, you'll be able to ask questions in the chat below, so please get on asking those. They're important for us today and also to give you as much information as possible. We'll get to those at the end of the conversation. The session is also being recorded, so all attendees and those who have registered will be able to watch it back at their convenience, because there's going to be some interesting things in here I think that you'll want to kind of look back over. So let's get started. A little question to ponder really to begin with. What if the biggest data breach your organization faces this year isn't caused by a hacker, but by your own AI, or more specifically, an AI that's actually doing what you asked it to do? We're at quite a pivotal moment in how organizations think about data. Over the last decade, we've seen a fundamental shift from highly controlled on-premise environments to cloud-first, highly distributed ecosystems. Today, most organizations operate in a hybrid or cloud-first model, with data spread across platforms like Microsoft 365, Google Workspace, Salesforce, Slack, and countless other SaaS applications. That transformation has unlocked huge benefits, right? Greater agility, scalability, and collaboration. But it's also fundamentally changed the way data is created, accessed, and exposed. And as a result, the risk landscape has evolved just as rapidly. We're finding in the UK and across EMEA, organizations are dealing with an explosion of unstructured data. Documents everywhere, emails, chats, and files often duplicated, overshared, and poorly governed. And increasingly, that data is being accessed not just by people, but by AI. Tools like Microsoft Copilot, ChatGPT, Google Gemini, and other generative AI platforms are now embedded in everyday workflows. They're helping employees move faster, automate tasks, unlock insights in ways that simply weren't possible before. But they also introduce a new kind of risk, right? Because these tools don't just store data, they interpret it, combine it, and surface it in entirely new contexts. Let's talk Copilot, for example. It can pull together insights from emails, Teams chats, SharePoint files, and OneDrive documents in seconds. That's incredibly powerful for teams, but it's only secure as the data it has access to. If permissions are too broad, if sensitive data isn't properly classified, or if governance isn't mature, Copilot, or any AI tool to be honest, can inadvertently expose information to users who were never intended to see it. And this isn't limited to one ecosystem. Whether it's someone pasting sensitive data into ChatGPT, using Gemini to summarize internal documents, or leveraging AI features embedded in SaaS platforms, the same fundamental challenge exists. Do we really understand our data well enough to use these tools safely? Alongside this, organizations are investing heavily in platforms like Microsoft Purview to address these challenges, bringing capabilities around data classification, data loss prevention, insider risk management, and governance. But the reality that we hear time and time again is that deploying these tools effectively is hard. Purview, for example, is incredibly powerful, but it depends on having a clear understanding of your data estate. Without that, organizations often struggle with incomplete classification, inconsistent policy enforcement, and high levels of noise, making it difficult to deliver and show real measurable value. And at the same time, Microsoft's consumption-driven model at the minute is accelerating adoptions of tools like Copilot, meaning organizations are being encouraged to move quickly, often before they fully address the underlying data challenges. So we arrive at a critical tension point. How do you enable innovation through AI without losing control of your data? How do we maximize the value of these platforms without introducing unnecessary risk? And then just to make things even more complicated, we add another layer to this conversation, agentic AI. We're moving beyond AI that simply responds to prompts and towards AI that can take actions autonomously on behalf of users, scheduling tasks, interacting with systems, making decisions, and in some cases, even collaborating with other agents. There have already been early experiments where AI agents, when left to interact with each other, begin to optimize their own communication, developing shorthand or entirely new ways of exchanging information that, as humans, we don't immediately understand. Now, today that may sound experimental, right? But the trajectory of this is really clear. As these systems become more capable and more embedded into the business processes, the question is no longer just who has access to your data, but what is your AI doing with it? And what is it doing at the speed and the scale that we just don't comprehend right now? And that introduces a completely new dimension of risk. So organizations are caught in a difficult position. On one hand, there's a clear mandate to adopt AI to drive productivity, innovation, and competitive advantage. But on the other, there's an increasing responsibility to ensure that data is governed, protected, and used safely. At Gradian, we work closely with organisations across the UK and EMEA to help them navigate these challenges. We have been doing for the last 25 years. We're bridging the gap between technology investment and real measurable security outcomes. Our focus is helping customers not just deploy these tools, but actually understand, govern, and secure their data in a way that aligns with modern ways of working. And alongside that, we're proud to be partnering with Concentric AI, an organisation that's fundamentally rethinking how the data security landscape is done. Concentric uses AI itself to solve one of the biggest challenges in this space, understanding data context. Rather than relying solely on manual classification or static policies, it enables organisations to automatically discover sensitive data, understand its risk, and apply protection in a far more dynamic and intelligent way. In a world where data is growing exponentially and being accessed in increasingly complex ways, that shift from reactive to intelligent, context-aware security is critical. So, what do we want to do today is bring this all together. With the help of Dave, we'll explore the current state of data risk across the UK and EMEA. Look how AI, from generative tools to emerging agentic systems, is reshaping both opportunity and threat. And discuss the real-world challenges organisations are facing when it comes to data governance, Microsoft tooling, and the safe use of AI in the workspace. More importantly, we'll show you how organisations can take a more modern, AI-driven approach, one that enables innovation without compromising security. And how Concentric can enhance and extend the value of platforms like Microsoft Purview. Our goal is simple today, to leave you with a clearer understanding of where your risks may lie, where gaps may exist in your current approach, and what practical steps are available for you to address them. So whether you're here from security, from IT, data governance, or business leadership prospect, we hope this session gives you both insight and actionable value. So what I'll do, let me pass over to Dave. And Dave, I think let's not reminisce, mate, but let's go back to the beginning of AI. Let's tell the story of where this all began, shall we?
That's brilliant. Thanks so much for that, Richard. So starting sort of at the start, AI itself isn't new. It's been around for decades in one form and another. But really what's new is the accessibility and the scale at which AI is now accessible. I'd say this is very similar to electric cars. Electric cars have been a long time coming. There's a few early Top Gear episodes where we're just taking the mickey, but now suddenly they're usable. There's real incentive to start using that new technology. And that's the same with AI. That with our founder's story, if you go back to 2017, talking about transformer neural networks, they could see the picture of where we are today, which is AI can be delivered at scale. And that was their wow moment when it came to AI. But really, it's also something that I like to recall, what was your wow AI moment? I think a lot of us have had that. In the last 2 years, we've started using it and it does something that you go, oh, wow, okay, this is different. This is just a glimpse of what the future is. And it's interesting, Richard, you mentioned, agentic AI and sort of the way it is changing the way we work. I'm functioning currently on about 3 weeks where I've had about 4 hours sleep a night, just simply because I'm discovering things and uncovering, new methods, new processes, all sorts of things. I wrote a song for my wife with AI the other day, just because I could. That's really
What a guy, Dave. What a guy.
I'm having wow AI moments, every evening at the moment. But it is funny, and if I go back to just over a year ago, that was my first one, which was I've been working with ChatGPT. I think we were at 4 or 4.5 at the time, and just, trying it out, asking, questions. What is life and are you real? And a few little bits and bobs like that. But I just said it to it one night. Tell me a story. And it created this story for me that was something that just seemed quite unique and almost personal to me. And I had to stop it and say, where'd that come from? And it basically said, well, based on discussions about your family, about your interests and similar there, that changed my expectations for what this could be overnight. It wasn't suddenly invented for me, but it became very personal, and it became relevant as well. So if tools that we're using can understand context this well, we're going to need to think very carefully about, the type of data that we're going to be giving them. You know, AI tools can now have agency, and a lot of these recent innovations that you've seen means that we're no longer at that stage of just analyzing data. We're now able to have AI act on it to make changes within our environment, within our files, and actually, enforce within our processes as well. Within efficiency, we can see where AI is now starting to handle repetitive, low value work. And this is enabling a lot of our teams to start focusing on strategy and productivity. We're also seeing through interactions with like customer service chatbots. I do sometimes wonder if these are a good thing. I know, I've a few times angrily typed at Rufus on Amazon, I want to talk to a human. I want to talk to a human. But the fact is that Gen AI is changing those strict decision trees to contextual conversation. So they're no longer about deflection, but they're actually about providing actual resolution. And if I go back to Rufus and offer an apology, I've actually found Amazon's chatbot is now getting quite effective at understanding a problem and finding a solution without having to, sort of take you up that process and get these tickets escalated and similar there. And I'd say also in the physical world, whether it's flipping burger or it's, pollination drones and similar there, AI is helping solve some of these labor shortages, but also ecological problems. It's doing this simultaneously. So it's starting to catch up with that promise, perhaps that we saw in movies or we read in books. Nerds like me used to read about this all the time. And what we're doing is we're moving from simple automation to complex autonomous innovation. But AI isn't just a productivity tool. This is a force multiplier. So the barrier for entry to cybercrime itself it's collapsing, and being able to, create attacks, and understand attack surfaces is becoming, faster, easier, much more accessible, and much, much more convincing. Misinformation itself can now spread, pretty much at the speed of thought. And I'm sure you're finding, within your own loved ones, within your own family and similar there, that they are getting caught out, and quite easily. Because things like deep fakes, they can be really convincing. If I tell you, my brother-in-law, and another nerd like me, he keeps sending me trailers for movies that I know just don't exist. He told me, this Christmas we're getting an Avengers movie with Robert Downey Jr. playing Doctor Doom. And then there's a Henry Cavill Highlander movie coming along. And honestly, I get fed up because I'm thinking, you're really struggling the difference, mate, to tell the difference between reality and fiction. Truth is, those are two movies that are actually coming. So jokes aside, data loss itself is going to be far easier, and we have to close the gaps that are still sitting there within our data security posture. So the question is, what's this all got to do with that data security? And the answer is, it's got everything to do with it. the data security struggle itself is a problem that should have been solved by now. And I can tell you, most organizations that I'm dealing with, they haven't been sleeping on security. They've been investing heavily in the tools. They've been putting together tactical response teams, and they've got clearly defined processes. But the truth is, most of them I found have some of those tools, those functions, that endpoint security. They've got their DLP basically stuck in monitor mode. And this is a major problem. We've been doing security the wrong way around. What we've been doing is we've been trying to enforce control, but we've never really had a good understanding of the data. And if you do it that way around, you're going to have a bad time. Data security is not going to work if it's built on a weak foundation. So your DLP rules then are going to be overreaching and they're going to be underwhelming. So most tools that we use today, they still don't understand the purpose of a document or of a data set, of a record, because they're missing the context. Most legacy tools that I've worked with, they can see patterns in the text, but they don't see the meaning. They can see signals, but they can't see the sensitivity. And that's why you'll find many of these tools that you've been implementing, they've overpromised, but they're under-delivering. I can have 100 solutions right now that can tell you a document has personal information in it, but I only have one that can tell you why it has that personal information in it. And discovery alone, it's not going to solve the problem. So you're going to need some context. Without context, basic questions like, what is this data? Where should I prioritize my efforts? These are going to be hard to answer. You can find data with many of the tools that you're already using, but you may not understand it. And without that understanding, governance teams aren't going to be able to find ownership. Your security teams aren't going to easily be able to assess risk. So we end up sinking more time into getting those answers and having to do that manually. So the traditional approach to data discovery has been to optimize what's easy to detect. So things like PII, PCI, healthcare, this sort of information, there are patterns that exist for those types of data. But what that is ignoring is business critical data. So I've worked with customers in recent months. These are real use cases where we've been specifically looking for data that is relevant to their business, to their organization. I've been looking for things like pharmaceutical formulas, or I've been helping organizations separate out legal precedent decisions from active client data. None of this information we would have been able to identify with, using a traditional sort of complex regex pattern or similar there. In all these cases, what we've needed is context. So let's talk about how this AI approach works. And I'll start this with an example. So this isn't a trick question. In fact, I think most of us can probably identify what this document is at a glance. But the real question is, how did you know that? And it wasn't because you saw a keyword or a pattern within the document. Nowhere on that screen does it say CV or resume. But what you did recognize was context. As Madhu, one of our founders, describes it, you saw the shape of the document. You understood the semantics telling you its purpose. And Concentric AI does the same. So 8 years ago, before large language models were a talking point, our founders, Madhu, Karthik, and the other guys were defining the process for how our purpose-built data governance security platform would work, would do what it does. And the patents that we hold today reflect that head start that we had in this industry. So the way we approach the data is that we have natural language processing that understands what we're looking at. So it's not just looking for patterns, it's looking at the content. It's breaking down the document or the record structurally. And then we have neural networks that reason over that structure and meaning. So again, think to that CV. You have a headline at the top there, and then you have an objective summary, and then you have work experience, and then you might have qualifications or similar there. That's what the neural networks are understanding was, what is the purpose of each parts of these documents? And then it brings that back together. So combined, our large language models then can express that understanding in human terms. So it brings all those different components together and says, oh, that's a CV or it's a resume. And that CV itself is associated with HR documents. And that CV is going to contain personal information. So that's what Concentric AI at the baseline, that's what we're doing. That's how we're looking at documents. That's how we're understanding data and identifying purpose. But the important thing isn't about how it works. It's more about what we're enabling. So if we continue to keep that CV example in mind, there's other questions that you would then ask. Once you know what it is, you want to know, well, whose CV was that? Was it an applicant? Was it an active employee's record? Was it linked to a senior executive that works within this organization? Because regardless of whether a person gets a job with us or not, we have an obligation to handle that document and the data contained therein very specifically. We are custodians of data that we receive, whether that's our own internal IP or whether that's personal information for people that are wanting the opportunity to work with us. And now, once you know that information, you'll have things like retention. Now it's being driven by meaning. Duplication of that document, it's now visible and manageable. And life cycle decisions, they start to become automatic. Again, there are very different decisions we make about records for employees versus records for candidates that perhaps were unsuccessful this time. So with a tool like Concentric AI, we can stop reacting and now we can start prioritizing data. And then there's, of course, the question about generative AI. Generative AI is an office superstar. And that's the truth. We are using these tools because they are actually working. They are delivering on the promise that they've come with. They're giving users context and they're making them more efficient and they're making them almost productive as well. I know I'm having to proofread a lot more documents before they go out. But they do introduce a new exfiltration path. So often data exposure itself, it's accidental, it's not malicious. And what Gen AI tools are doing is they're exposing that long-standing issue with data governance. Data governance, once upon a time, just 10 years ago, data loss was a conscious decision. Someone would choose to upload a file to a file sharer, or they would choose to send customer information to their personal email account via webmail or similar there. But most users working with Gen AI, they're not trying to leak that data. They're just trying to keep up with everyone else. So data classification here is where this can come in and help protect your data. But it's only going to do that if that classification is accurate. Copilot, as an example, Copilot has the guardrails built in. It understands classification. It respects the rules and the policies that you've applied. But it's only going to work as long as it's correctly aligned with sensitive data assets, as long as our data has been accurately identified. And that's where the context comes in, because context is what makes that possible. So let's go back to DLP. And the question that many people will be asking, if they've already spent hundreds of thousands of pounds protecting their data perimeter through DLP, through investments in similar technologies, we know we've learned the lesson. Many of us have learned this the hard way. DLP will fail without context. So let's apply context through enrichment. With Concentric AI, contextual discovery is going to provide you with accurate classification labels. And those labels then can help simplify your DLP design. And now your DLP policy is going to enforce based on the meaning of the label, not on the patterns within the document itself. And that goes a long way to enforcing that perimeter security if you let the right tools do the heavy lifting for you. So why Concentric AI? Well, it should be clear now that this is where the context is going to be coming in from. Our AI understands the data the same way you do. So you start with discovery, you learn what you have, you then identify the risks and the gaps within your security posture. And then what we can do is we can apply remediation to close those gaps, whether it's through classification, through repermissioning documents, through moving data into secure data repositories. And we do this across the entire estate. So you're not just limited to Microsoft. You're not just limited to AWS or your on-prem file servers. Everything is going to be identified in place and in context. And then we simply feed the governance and security controls so that DLP can enforce rather than having to take a best guess. We're not finding just finding PII anymore with Concentric. We're understanding IP. We're understanding business critical data, and we're able to help perform data hygiene. We're looking at deduplication, we're looking at stale data, and we're understanding this in context. Risk can now be called out, not just because this document looks a little sensitive, but Concentric will tell you why it's considered risky, why it's in the wrong place, and why it's exposed to the wrong people. Or even further, Concentric AI can help tell you, we're seeing behavior around particular data sets, particular types of data that doesn't make sense in context. And that's the most important bit. We're not just pointing at the problem. We're going to then help you fix it, whether it's through a label, through the location, through the permissions, through the retention, or of course, handing it cleanly off to DLP or a similar tool to enforce based on those parameters. So we started the session talking about AI, talking about, a bit of the hype, talking about the legacy tools and broken promises that we've had along the way. But what we've really been circling all this time is three simple questions. One, what is my data? Two, what is it? Or where is it? And three, who has access to it? And context is the difference between guessing and knowing. So every struggle we've talked about today comes back to the same thing. Decisions being made with that context. Data security, data risk, data hygiene, data compliance, and access control. All of those decisions need context. And with context, Concentric AI can provide you with clear answers about your business data and your data security posture. So we come in and we can categorize your data. We can understand who's responsible for it. We can then identify those gaps, and we can then streamline the enforcement through that. So with that, let's actually move into a demo and actually take you through the platform, and I'll show you some real use cases here. So I'm just going to refresh my screen. And let's have a quick look here. Oh, I do apologize. I have a blank screen. There we go. So yeah, Concentric AI itself, connects within your environment. Basically, when you set Concentric AI up, we're an agentless platform and we're deployed from the cloud. We are a SaaS platform. So when we connect to your environment, we can do so through APIs where available, and we have proxy services and similar there, which allow us to create a secure tunnel to connect to on-prem services and other resources that might not support direct interaction through an API and similar there. But what that allows us to do is quickly onboard our customers and get them these insights delivered so that they can start understanding what they have, through categorization, where we can tell you exactly what sort of data you have, who has access to that data, and of course, how they have access as well. We've got the different categories there. We've also got pattern-based classification. So again, while we're not relying on patterns, we can still tell you where the sensitive data assets reside within your environment. Personal information. It could be financial data. It can be custom data. We've got customers who work in certain industries where they say, look, matter IDs and client IDs, these are most important to us because we need to know how that data is moving laterally across our environment. We can understand data hygiene, data duplication, where we're seeing multiple copies of files, of the content of the file, and also where we're seeing replication. But perhaps we've got a contract, and we've got users that are replicating that data, making changes to date or making changes to recipients and similar there. We can also use that information to understand near duplication as well. And that's quite important, for customers that are looking to reduce the spread, reduce the attack surface. We've got tools there that are able to help in those areas too. We can also look at the age of data. So again, understanding duplication in particular, and then looking at within the context of, well, we've got copies of files, perhaps exact like for like copies that are 20 plus years old. I had this recently with an organization we were working with Richard and his team, and we were looking at export data for an organization. And what they found was they had things like shipping manifests, inventory files, and similar there that were 20 plus years old. That actually inherited it years ago through an acquisition, but it had just been sitting there, and it was just steadily ticking over in terms of the cost of storage, the cost of backups, and similar there. So we're able to very quickly paint with broad strokes and get an idea of, well, here's your current expenditure on potential resources that you don't need to retain. And then we'll look at existing classifications. For a lot of organizations, as I say, they've not been sleeping on their data. They've applied their own classification labels, whether that's through manual tagging, through pattern-based systems, legacy systems, and similar there. We can understand and identify those labels. And then we can also look at anything that potentially is exposed because it's underclassified based on policy, based on what we have. We can help to quickly identify those gaps and remediate there as well. And that comes together with understanding who has access to the data. You know, where is the data being exposed, to which users across the organization, and also how it's been exposed to them. Have they got direct access? Again, applying least privilege access models. You know, we've been talking about this for a long time. Or anonymized access. Users sharing information off the back of a Teams call, you know, exposing anonymous access through their OneDrive and similar there. If it happens, we want to know about it, particularly if it's got sensitive information and we need to close those gaps up quickly. And of course, understanding, you know, once that data has been shared, well, who's accessing it? What are they doing with it? We've got activity analytics that are coming in within the platform, and we're able to use that to tell you who's working, what they're doing with it, and we can start exposing anomalies. Again, if a user with an organization, say for instance, they're called Dave Matthews and they work at Concentric AI, and they start downloading customer files from Salesforce and they start sending that to David J. Matthews at Hotmail, we can find that activity, pick it up, and we can flag it and say, well, that ain't right. That's something that we need to look into and we need to quickly expose and close the gap. And again, I'm just talking about visibility, but if you actually want to automate the processes, lock that account down and similar there, well, we've got the tools to do that, to assist you or to enrich the other tools, perhaps the other processes you've already established and you have in place, and get that automated. So those are the insights sort of at a broad level from the top down, from what you can find. But for many customers that we're working with today, one of the first questions that myself and Richard will ask you is, what are the problems? What are the things keeping you up at night? What are the pain points or the areas that are of concern? And we use that information to then build out particular insights that are tailored to each customer, to their pain points, to the use cases. We can identify, what users are doing with your data through activity, but also show you, well, here's some areas of exposure. So looking at what matters most, it might be we've got particular types of data, whether it's legal data being shared externally, or just simply PII, personal information that is exposed to personal accounts. We could be looking for things like credentials, whether they're financial data being stored in clear text, or whether it's you've got a product team working internally that's accidentally left some credentials within their source code. We can pick that up and we could quickly highlight, you've got some gaps here, you've got some risk, we need to close that down. And all of this is customizable, based on every different customer that we work with. We build these out, and not just a case of, you have to just define what you want to find. With Concentric AI, we have a customer success team that's actually going to work alongside you through this process to make sure, we're understanding your data, we're giving you the insights that matter the most to you, and then we can identify and we can close those gaps. And that's the other thing, what matters to you. So being able to use Concentric to quickly identify, data or potential exposure within your organization, that can be done here within the platform itself. So I'm just looking here. I've got, just under 4 terabytes or sorry, 4 gigabytes of data, 11,500 files that I've scanned within this particular environment. And you can see here, out of the box, we've already identified data around different categories, insurance information, financial data, legal and HR, and similar there. These are out of the box models that we've already defined, that we've built using our own data, and we've carefully curated to share with customers. We don't just stop there though. We can build additional categories within a customer environment for data, or use the sort of the references and naming conventions that you might want to use as well within your organization. And this out of the box will then help you to understand, what's the difference between a background check, an immigration document, an employee separational agreement, or an HR policy document. We can find these different types of files, these different types of data, and we can quickly understand, where they sit within your environment, how much you have. So if I'm looking here, I've got a resume files that I've found within this environment, and we have 38 files overall. So it's not a great big footprint, but I might want to understand, well, where are these files sitting? Who's got access to them? I can very quickly surface this using our permissions toolbar there. And we've also got, understanding right down to the users. As I mentioned before, if you've got an internal user that might be sharing data to a linked account, to a personal account, we can find that, and we can find that natively. And not to say that we have managed to expose that, but there have been a number of proof of concept projects that we've been working with where we've found things that we weren't expecting to find. And I think the recipients that were sharing information with their personal accounts weren't expecting us to find that either. So once you know what you have, who's got access to it, then we also want to know where it sits. So again, if we're scanning data across multiple endpoints within your environment, we can get an understanding of, well, in this case, we've got CVs, and we might say, well, yeah, users can maintain their own CV. It can sit within their OneDrive. That's no problem. But if it's in another data source, whether it's a file server, a legacy file server, perhaps it's a system like Dropbox or Box, a legacy system that we're looking to spin down at some time in future. We might say, well, let's close those gaps up. So I'm going to quickly create a search here. I'm going to say, well, the location is not equal to OneDrive. So now I'm looking at files that are not currently in the right location. So I can see I've got overall 32 files, and they're spread across Dropbox, Box, and we've got Google Drive there as well. And now before I make a change, before I enact a policy and say, well, let's move this, I could also go and verify one of these files. And we do so, we just click in and we get taken here to the file view. Now you notice I'm not looking at a Word document. I'm not looking at this person's CV. That's because Concentric we're not an indexer. We're not taking all of the information and putting it into the cloud, but rather we're giving you the key insights so you can take action on. So this includes information such as lineage. So we can look at the actual usage of the file. And in this environment, I can see the original copy of this file turned up in 2019. The version I'm looking at was copied to Box in 2021 by this user. And then I can see other copies, modified copies, and similar there across different environments. So we can see the life cycle of the data. This environment itself, this file is part of a demo. So we're only seeing really copies and replication. But in a live environment, I'd be seeing read attempts. I'd be seeing users downloading this file, making changes in place, and similar there. We can keep an eye on all of that activity. And of course, you can export this out as well. If you want to investigate and understand, well, who's been working and interacting with this data, you can get that information and have it delivered straight to your inbox. And we've got other properties there around the file, where the duplicates reside, the permissioning, even down to the metadata details. But what's quite important here is we've also flagged this file has been highlighted as a medium risk because it's missing classification. In this case, it's qualified for Microsoft information protection labels. In other words, we're connected to a Microsoft environment and we haven't applied a classification label. So it could potentially be exposed through Copilot or similar there until we provide that label. So if I was to go back to my file view and just look at, we've got, again, 32 files here. Just waiting for the screen to refresh at my end. We've got 32 files that are exposed, and I can say, well, let's close those gaps quickly here. So we create a policy. We give that policy a name, and you'll see the filter that has been applied has already pulled through, the insights that I used and created there. So we can say, right, well, we're going to assign risks. No, we're not. We're going to move the data. And we're going to bring this data from Box, Dropbox, Google Drive, and we want to put it in on our SharePoint server. And I can choose a location on SharePoint if I choose. And then the other option there was I saw we were missing classification. Now I don't have to go and verify. I could go and search and see is anything else missing classification, but I could just simply say as a policy, if a document is a CV, or we could structure this and we could say if it's a CV that contains PII, then I'm going to apply a classification label of confidential. So these labels that I'm looking at right here, right now, are labels that we've pulled in from our M365 environment. So you don't need to maintain multiple catalogs. You can create your own labels within your Microsoft Purview. You could create these within Google Workspaces, or you might have another catalog that you want to use. And we can pull those labels in, apply them to the documents here that meet the criteria. And also you might say, I'm a forward thinker, Dave. I don't want to put all my eggs in Microsoft's basket. So I'm going to also embed a label within the file properties. And that's great. We do that as well. So we can have these embedded labels where we put them into the document properties, into the metadata. And I can say this is confidential as well. So you can maintain and ensure you've got that fidelity between the different levels of labeling. The last thing I might want to do is I might say, oh, let's just check on those permissions as well. We want to set a rule because we don't want, again, personal information exposed with anonymous access. So within this SharePoint environment, I'm denying anonymous access through the anyone group. So you can create these rules. Again, we can say there might be categories of users, perhaps members within our supply chain and similar there. We have rules for who is going to be permission, depending on the type of data, depending on the context of the document. And then we can set rules around, how we're going to define these permissions. So all of this is remediation. This is sort of showing you the broad use case, but this is where I can ensure that the right people have access to the right data and it's sitting in the right location. The last thing I'll do before I apply this change is I'm going to let the file owner know, oh, hey, we're moving your data as well under a particular policy, under a particular file restructuring. We're going to push that straight out. And I can send that via an email. And all I need to do here is just hit create, and we're going to push that change up and ensure that that change is applied to the existing files. In this case, just 32 files. But we can also ensure that anything else that comes in that meets that criteria, if it's in the wrong location, if it's incorrectly permissioned, if it's missing classification, this policy just applies that automatically. It means your security teams can focus on other areas. They're freed up from this task, which is considered something that's repetitive, that's menial, but also very important in terms of our data security posture. So that's the Concentric platform in action. There are a number of different use cases that we deal with customers. And the truth is, at the end of it all, data security without context is going to be just guesswork. If you don't know what you have, who it belongs to, why it exists, then every control that you apply from that point on is going to be an educated guess. And hopefully what I've stressed here as well is we're not asking you to go and throw everything away. Your investments in security tools, they are valid, but they only work properly when the context comes first. So if you already have a DLP, if you have Microsoft Purview, or you're planning to implement Gen AI initiatives, the question isn't going to really be, do you need context? It's more a question of, do you want to discover that gap you had through a data breach, or do you want to do it on your own terms? And Concentric AI, working with Gradian here, we can make sure that you can accomplish that. So Richard, that's everything that I wanted to share with everyone attending here today. Hopefully you've had a few questions come through there. But yeah, I'm happy to answer anything that we've had on the fly, and yeah, let's take it away.
Well, I've had a lot of virtual high fives for great presentation and the like, so that's good. But Dave, I do have a couple of questions, if that's all right with you, mate. The interesting about Purview, obviously you've worked with us for a while, and what we do in that DLP space, and the amount of businesses we come up against who have started that DLP journey, got through the Purview kind of weeds of it, and realised actually, all the kind of policies that need to be written and the regex that needs to be devised because those first policy wasn't quite right. The things like Concentric are delivering real kind of value in that. But when it comes to some of the kind of more kind of focus points around DLP and data and understanding. One of the things that we come up against a lot is around how we manage DSAR requests. How is that streamlined? Because if we go back 2 years ago when, before these tools were really kind of out in the mix and delivering the value they are, a journey for a DSAR request was weeks. It was a long time to find everyone's data and things. How is Concentric managing that piece from a kind of platform play, or actually finding the data that is held against somebody's name inside an organization?
So finding the data is literally seconds. The great thing about Concentric AI is I mentioned before the privacy types, these sensitive data assets that were identified. So one of the things that comes with context is that when we scan a CV, we know we're going to find personal information in there. We're going to like most likely find a name. I will say some CVs I've seen don't have a name. Um, but we will find a name, we will find most likely an email address, a contact phone number, and similar there. Concentric knows that. So we are already looking for that information within that document. And when we find it, we can then catalog that as well. So when you go to look for, hey, Dave Matthews has just invoked his right to be forgotten through a DSAR request.
Surely
You
not.
can,
Surely not.
using our platform, surely not. I'd never militarize, I'd never weaponize a DSAR. But but no, you can then search for those documents. And of course, if you're searching for Dave Matthews on its own, just on the name, you're going to have a bad time because there are literally thousands of us out there. So there will be things like, a date of birth, a home address, a postcode. It could be an email address. These different metrics you can include in that search. You can narrow down. Maybe you have internal criteria. You have a customer ID or similar that a policy ID. Then you can also use that to narrow the search so that you can quickly find those documents. And it is literally a case of just put in what your search criteria is, hit search. We bring all those documents together. As easy as it was when I clicked on CV, we just marked up those documents no matter where they're located. And then at that point, you've got options. You can move the data. You can make a copy of the data. For customers I work with, they put the equivalent of a legal hold on that data. So they'll tag the file to say, currently under investigation, do not change, which implements a whole bunch of other processes in the background to ensure those files aren't deleted while this investigation is ongoing. And then if they need to anonymize, then they can invoke processes there to ensure that data can be cleaned up. Any files that don't need to be retained, that's a great opportunity to clean up as well there. And for anything else, you can very quickly take action on that, knowing that you've got all the information. You don't have to continue searching. And we're talking about files, but we could be talking structured data records and databases. We could be talking emails coming in, Teams messages and similar there. We've been perhaps sharing information internally as we've been responding to other customer requests and similar there. So pulling all that information together through, again, a single pane of glass, to be able to answer questions or requests for DSARs and similar there, much, much easier with Concentric AI.
Yeah, that's excellent. I have two other questions. One is around integrations. So, we spoke earlier about SaaS platforms talking to others and integrations into better visibility around data. How does Concentric work with those integrations? Let's say with the well-known ones and also the not so well-known ones.
Yeah. So the really good thing about working with Concentric AI is that we work very closely with our customers. So we have a number of integrations. They're available on our website. We can always make sure that we share the link to that integrations page. And we've got a number that are already working out of the box. And many of those have come from customers asking us, in specific areas, can we work with them? And then others we can build out, many modern technologies, many cloud-based SaaS solutions are similar there. They already have a method for communicating with them. So we can work with customers. And to give you a use case, we had someone come to us recently. They wanted particular insights into NetApp. Now we could do NetApp already, directly through SMB. We can look at the files, we can get an understanding, but their particular requirement was actually what they needed to see was activity around the files. You can't do that through SMB. We had to do that through the ONTAP protocol, something native to NetApp. So our engineering team jumped to it, and within a month, we had an ONTAP integration available. We made that available to the customer, and we're able to proof of concept that through them. And now, because we've proven that that works, we've made it available to other customers. And what you'll see is, keep an eye on the integrations page. You'll see it come up there as it passes the checks and balances. We document the onboard process and similar there. So if customers are looking at integrations, they're looking at our integrations page and saying, I don't see anything there at the moment around a particular requirement. Give us a call. Just have a chat with us, because in many cases we're going to be able to work with the customer directly to ensure that we can get them insights into the data that matters to them most.
Yeah, perfect. It's good stuff. I've got one last one, David, then I won't keep you any longer, mate. And that is around things like GDPR, things like ISO 27001, things like I had text ramp the other day around, somebody wanting to see how aligned their data was to the regulations around text ramp. How is that able to be achieved within Concentric? Because beforehand, that would take weeks and months to try and find the data to see how it aligned to these frameworks. How is that managed inside of Concentric?
So we have a frameworks component built within the platform itself. And a lot of the common frameworks you mentioned there, ISO, if we're looking at GDPR, if we're looking at PCI and similar to them, we've already got those frameworks built in. So I've got some customers that we have come to us in the early days, the question comes up, what problems are we looking to answer? And they'll say, well, I'm not really sure. I just want to know what I have, but also what's at risk. And that's brilliant, because we can wrap GDPR around that. And we can say, well, we're going to look at that through this particular lens. And these frameworks can then produce custom reports that will tell you exactly where, okay, here's how closely you're aligned to this particular compliance framework, and here's the gaps that you need to close. And again, with the use of our tool, you can remediate those automatically, or you might simply say, well, this is just giving us a good insight so that we can accelerate the process, when it comes to certifications for ISO 27001. When it comes to, we're going to have external auditors coming in to review our current processes. You can have Concentric AI produce reports so that you can show, well, here's our alignment in these areas. And it's not just locked down to what we've defined ourselves. Customers can also import their own. So if they've got their own frameworks for internal processes, or one of the newer processes like the AI Act, the EU AI Act, and similar there. We don't have the definition integrated into the platform yet, but if you've already got the controls mapped out, hey, look, have a chat with us, because we can work with you. We'd love to copy from your notes, but you can integrate that directly within the platform. It's a simple import, or if you want to map them out manually, you can do that there as well. So the whole framework, that whole component is built into the platform. In the interest of time, I did skip over it, but I can assure you it's right there and it's ready to go. It takes 2 clicks and you'll have those reports within minutes.
Yeah, what I'm getting the sense of is just the lack of limitations, Dave. I think that's the important piece to gain from that, right? I think when we look at every organization is different. They have their own. There's going to be a scattering of similar use cases, because there generally is when it comes to data security and DLP. We either come across businesses who are right at the early stages of it and they want to know what they've got, or we find people who are right in the kind of middle of it and have come against the pain and they want to almost work it backwards to say, well, we actually do need to find what we've got. But when you look at these intricacies around frameworks that people are trying to align to, and DSARs, as we mentioned earlier, I think the lack of limitations with this bodes well for conversations that are yet to come that we haven't even seen yet. Use cases that haven't even arrived yet, which is great. So that's all my questions. There's been a few bits in the chat, nothing specific we need to answer today, but you've got a minute or two if anybody wants to drop any questions. This recording will be available afterwards, and both myself and Dave's contact details, I'm sure, will be available on that as well. So feel free to reach out with any questions on that. But Dave, that's great. Really enjoyed the conversation today. Thank you for running through with that. And we'll leave you to get on with the rest of your day. I really appreciate everyone's time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, everyone.